Wait, Professor,
Yeah.
just a quick question. Both group A and B are supposed to meet today, right?
Yeah, and today uh, there's not like an attendance requirement, so it's not counting towards extra credit. If you missed a day, it will, but yeah, today's for group A and B.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so for all the final questions, so we're going to do, I'll spend the last half of the class doing final review. So just 20 seconds left. So if you've not chosen an answer, definitely choose one. And then also just for those who are just joining us, so the way I'm kind of structuring today is it'll basically be the first half will be kind of a review of game theory, chapter 17, and then the second half will be final exam review. Okay, so let's take a look and okay, so good. I'm glad that we are going over this question then. So the question is basically asking, so Fred and Naomi are trying to decide how to spend Sunday, and so their payoffs are given in this game theory example. So Naomi's strategy, so her payoff is going to be the black one, and then Fred's strategy in his payoff is going to be the red one. So this is slightly, I think, a little clearer than it will be on the final, because on the final, there's not going to be color differentiation to tell you like which one, if it's Fred's payoff or Naomi's payoff, or kind of differentiating who is who. So how you can determine if it is a Nash equilibrium is, so if we look here, so we can see that, let's say for Naomi. So Naomi is basically her payoff, if Fred chooses football, is either going to be, and let me get a little drawing thing here so we can see it more clearly. So let's say that Fred chooses football. So Naomi can either choose football or a movie. So Naomi is going to choose football because that's greater than the payoff for the movie. So then if Fred chooses movie, Naomi's going to choose movie because that is her greatest payoff. So then now let's do Fred. So let's say that Naomi chooses football. So Fred's greatest payoff is going to be if he chooses football as well. And then if Naomi chooses movie, so Fred's strategy is going to be either movie or sorry, either football or movie. So then his payoff is going to be movie. So let's take a look now. So does that make sense, I guess, so far before we move on to looking at the answers? Or does anyone have any questions before we move on? Okay, so now let's take a look at, let me delete the annotations. Okay, so then the reason for this question, and I think I can see why a lot of you chose C, but the most correct answer is going to be B, because for Fred, remember, for dominant strategy, that means they always choose the same outcome. And so we saw for Fred that he will choose either football or movie, depending on what Naomi chooses. So then the Nash equilibrium for this particular game would be either football, football, or movie, movie. And because in this example, the answers do not give you the option of football, football, the correct answer is going to be movie, movie, because A is not correct, C is not correct, and then D is not correct. So this was a pretty hard question, but definitely kind of a good practice for the midterm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, like in this case, there actually like isn't a dominant strategy for either of them, right? 'Cause,
Correct.
like, they're both dependent on each other to make the best like payoff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And this one is tricky because if they had presented you with another option, that would have changed the answer. So, like, for example, if they had said movie is a Nash equilibrium, or football is a Nash equilibrium, both of those would have been correct. So then you would have had to basically choose either of those. So because they only gave you the movie option, that's the only one that you know is correct, because you can eliminate A and you can eliminate C. So then that's kind of just process of elimination will kind of lead you to B.
So for Nash equilibrium, it's always like they choose the one that's like they're both benefiting out of it, right? Like they both have like the highest one. So like as you said in this case, there is two, right? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And the kind of thing that I think about with like Nash equilibrium is when there are ever two circles, so like this is circled and this is circled, that's kind of how you know that's probably going to be the Nash equilibrium for that situation.
Professor,
Yeah.
so for this question, technically there can be two Nash equilibriums,
Correct.
and that's true for all questions presented like this?
No, so not necessarily. The way that I would suggest you kind of look at these questions is so kind of the way that I went through it, basically like circling the outcome that was most beneficial in each case. That's the way you're going to want to do it. And when you see two circles in the same outcome box, that's going to give you an indication that that's the Nash equilibrium. So usually there's only one. Very occasionally there can be two.
Okay, but when there's two, you don't have to pick one? Like there's not one better than the other?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do the next question then. So this is going to be a similar kind of game theory question, but this one is asking you for dominant strategy. So take a look at this, and then I will give a little bit over 2 minutes as well to answer this one too. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The second number, like after the comma, that's column, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Hi, Professor. I have a very quick question about the exams. So will it be the same format as our other tests?
Yes, I'll actually I'll go over the exam in the last half, but yes, yeah, will be the same format.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so a little over 15 seconds left. So if you've not had a chance to answer, definitely make sure to get in an answer, and then we will go over the question. Okay, so let's take a look. Oh, awesome. Okay, great. So this one was a lot clearer, but definitely I'm going to just review it as well just to make sure. So when we're asked for dominant strategy, once again, we're going to do kind of the same process that we did for the prior one. So first, let's do row. So if column chooses left, row can either choose up or down. So in this case, row gets a benefit of 2 if they choose up, or 3 if they choose down. So they're going to choose down. So then the same process for if column chooses right. So row can choose up or down. So they're going to choose down. So we know that row's dominant strategy is to choose down because they are always going to choose down regardless of what column chooses. So then now let's do column. So if row chooses up, column can either choose left or right. So in this case, we can see that the right is 3 is going to be greater than the left of 2. So then the same thing for if row chooses down. So 0, 1. So then column is going to choose 1. So then we know that the dominant strategy for column is going to be right. And just kind of going a little step further on this. So you see the 2 circled on the bottom right-hand corner. So this is going to be the Nash equilibrium right here for this game. If the question asked you for that, that would be the correct answer. So it would be down right. Does anyone have any questions before we move on?
I have a question. Why wouldn't left up, like for column left and then row up, also be considered Nash equilibrium?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. And you would actually think that they would both benefit more from choosing up left, but because the dominant strategy for row is down and column is right, they're going to basically meet where both of the they choose both of the same thing, which in this case is going to be in this lower right-hand corner.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, and that's actually a really good point, and kind of gets into the prisoner's dilemma too. So like technically they would both be better off if they chose this outcome, but they don't. So if they were maybe able to talk or work something out, they could actually get to a situation where they would both benefit more. But in the current scenario, they do not choose the best outcome because they're not talking with one another. Okay. So let's get started then on chapter 17. Okay, So chapter 17 kind of continues game theory. For chapter 17, though, we're specifically focusing on oligopolies. So the first thing to kind of begin our discussion is we should talk about market concentration. And there's this really simple calculation that the US government actually uses when they're kind of trying to build antitrust cases. And that's called the concentration ratio. And basically that's just the percentage of total output in the market supplied by the 4 largest firms. So you can see kind of an example here where if we're looking at, let's say like video games, so like video game consoles in the United States, the concentration ratio is 100%. So the 4 largest firms supply basically all of the output of the market. And you can see for credit cards and cell phone service, those markets are also incredibly concentrated. So oligopolies are actually pretty common in the real world. And actually that is how a lot of corporations operate. And that's a very common market structure. So what is an oligopoly? So an oligopoly is basically just a market structure where there are only a few sellers and they offer similar or identical products. And the key difference here between the oligopoly and other market structures we've studied is that oligopolies, there is this strategic behavior that occurs with oligopolies. And that strategic behavior is each individual firm's decision about price or quantity impacts the other firm in the market. And then that impact is going to cause other firms to change their pricing quantity based on what the other firm does. And so ultimately, what happens is you get kind of this game theory scenario where you have different firms reacting to one another based on the price and quantity that each firm is producing and supplying in the market. So because of that, let's take a look first at a duopoly. So a duopoly is basically just 2 firms in the market. And in this case, we're given the price and quantity for the firms. And then we're also given each firm's cost. So we're given the fact that there are no fixed costs in this market and marginal cost is $10. So with that, we can compute their total revenue and their total cost. So basically all we're going to do is take the marginal cost here and multiply that by quantity to get the total cost. So we can compute total revenue, total cost, and then we can also compute profit. So we can just compute that right down there. So a really important piece to remember is, I think we kind of discussed this a little bit before, but marginal costs are not variable costs, but they are average variable cost. So that's kind of the important distinction there, is that when you're trying to figure out the oligopoly total cost and you're given only marginal cost, you can figure that out based on the total cost equation here. So basically total cost is equal to quantity multiplied by the average variable cost, which in this case is just the marginal cost because there are no fixed costs. So when we have this duopoly outcome, it's still not going to be or get us to the perfectly competitive outcome. And remember, for perfect competition, we want the price to equal marginal cost. So if it was a perfectly competitive outcome, this is what we would see. We would see the price is equal to $10 and the price of $10 is equal to marginal cost of $10, which would mean that that is the perfectly competitive outcome. And we also see that profit is 0 here, which is what we expect with a perfectly competitive outcome. Now for a duopoly though, that's somewhat in between the monopoly and competitive outcome. So we also need to figure out the monopoly outcome. So for the monopoly outcome, we can actually determine this based on the marginal cost and marginal revenue. determining where those are equal. So when we determine that, we actually find that this is going to be the monopoly outcome. And remember, for marginal revenue, it's just the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. So we have now our competitive outcome and we have our monopoly outcome. So this is where things get a little complicated. And the reason for that is because the firms want to be at this scenario. They want to be at the monopoly outcome because that is where they earn the largest profit. But to achieve that outcome, they have to collude. So you see here that with collusion, basically that just means that they're going to get together and come to some sort of agreement. And in that agreement, they're basically going to have an outcome that benefits both of them the most. But as we saw with the game theory examples, that's usually not what we get. And the reason for that is because firms, people, countries, when they're in sort of a game theory context, there's this self-interest that comes out. And self-interest is really this idea that I want to make the most for myself. I don't care about what's happening to you. I want to increase my benefits to the largest possible extent. And what that means for our duopoly scenario is that, so we're currently at this situation, the monopoly outcome. Both firms have profits that are maximized. But as we can see in number 2 here, what happens if one firm cheats on the agreement? So if one firm cheats, they're going to increase their quantity by 10 units. So then that moves us to this outcome. So now you can see that profits have decreased because prices decreased. So the cheating firm is making all the additional profits while the non-cheating firm is actually losing money. So because of that, the non-cheating firm is then going to cheat as well. And so now both firms are producing 40. So now we move to this outcome where the total market quantity is 80. So the price is now 30. And so now each firm's profits are only 800. And so basically what that means is we're just going to kind of keep, if one firm keeps cheating down and down the line, we get to this perfect competition scenario. Frequently, it will not go all the way down the line. It'll stop at a certain point. But already, if we compare the original profits that each firms were getting, so each firm was getting a $900 profit, the $800 that they're both earning now is significantly less than the 900. So we can already see that both firms are worse off by cheating. But because it's in their own self-interest to cheat, there's always going to be that temptation to cheat on the agreement. And that's basically what's going to happen. And we see that in normal market structures all the time. So like there are frequently examples of like companies colluding to set prices. There was a recent case against steel companies where they had colluded to set like a price for steel. But what happened was a company broke the agreement and sold a little bit more steel. And so then that set off this chain reaction where every firm was cheating until finally they drove the total market outcome to the less optimal scenario for both firms. So big takeaway here is just that collusion usually breaks down. And the reason for that is because firms act in their self-interest and cheat. And by cheating, when one firm cheats, the other firm's going to cheat too. And that just kind of keeps happening until they reach some sort of equilibrium.
Professor?
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that usually they don't get all the way down to $0 profit?
Yeah, that is safe to say. That is that usually takes like many, many years to happen. So yeah, that's usually not the exact outcome.
Okay, thank you.
And so just kind of reiterating what I already said, but just it's very, very difficult for firms to achieve and honor agreements because one of the firms is always going to want to cheat. So a slightly more complicated example is when you have multiple firms and you have kind of a production example where you have each firm producing a specific quantity that gets you to the market quantity. So this is kind of what we talked about before, but in this case, we're actually asked what is the interest of each firm to increase output further. So is it in each firm's interest to actually increase output from 47 units to, 50 units? So if the firms actually do increase production, so they're currently producing at 37, so would they benefit if they increase production to 47? So then because we tested that, and we tested that here, and can see that the firm is generating basically a slightly higher revenue if they cheat, so 925 versus 940, then the firms are going to cheat. And because of that, we kind of get into the scenario. Didn't realize it ended there. So we get into that scenario where we're basically left with the firms cheating again. And that's kind of the test you can do, is basically say, so if the firm increases production to the next level, are they going to increase their profit? If the answer is yes, then what's going to happen is that the firm is going to cheat because they could earn more money if they cheated. And so that's kind of going to be the same scenario that we see playing out here as well. Okay, so now let's look at another hypothetical oligopoly scenario. In this case, we have two electricity companies, so Entergy and ComEd. So both of these companies were given the price, quantity, and total revenue. And we're told that both companies decide to collude and enter into an agreement to produce the same quantity. So this is our current market outcome. So we have a quantity of 510, we have a market price of 30, and each firm's profits can be determined by taking the total revenue and dividing it just by 2. In this case, we're told that there are no costs. So the firms are basically just given the revenue is just their profit. So now we have to determine what is the Nash equilibrium. So to determine the Nash equilibrium, we have to ask that same question. What if the firm increased production to the next level? What would happen in that scenario? And so we see that because of that, we're actually going to get to this scenario. That's going to be the Nash equilibrium. And so we can basically find that through seeing if, let me erase that. So if the firm's profits increase by cheating, basically just move that to the next quantity. So for example, like we're at this scenario right now. So ComEd can earn more money if they cheat and produce 100 more. But remember, once one firm cheats, the other firm's going to cheat. So then Entergy is also going to cheat. So now we're at this scenario. So the next step would be Entergy is now thinking about cheating. So now you have to determine, is Entergy going to be able to increase their profits by moving to the next quantity? If the answer is yes, then they're going to cheat. If the answer is no, then they're not going to cheat. And then this outcome would be the Nash equilibrium. And so we can see actually, because this scenario, if Intergy actually cheated on the agreement and moved to a quantity of 810, that once they move to that next quantity, they would actually be earning less profits than they would at this scenario. So because of that, we know that the Nash equilibrium in this specific example is going to be at a price of 20, because if the firm cheats, they're going to decrease their total profits and each individual profits. So that's how we can determine the Nash equilibrium. Basically, just keep going through that kind of scenario where, what if the firm cheats? What if the firm cheats? And once you reach a point where if the firm cheats, they're actually not making more profits, that's where you know the Nash equilibrium is for that specific scenario.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Because we know that if you keep moving up, obviously the total revenue decreases. So if the question just asks us for the Nash equilibrium, do you just move 2 up? Because then you already take consideration like both are going to cheat, so you just move 2, or should you move another 2?
Yeah, so basically what you would do is, so we know already that we moved from the initial outcome here. And then so one time, and then if there's one, if one firm cheats, you automatically know the other firm is going to cheat.
Yeah.
Then that gets you to here.
Mhm.
Oh, no, go for it. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just wondering, and then should we keep going because they might keep on cheating, or should we just stop?
Yeah, no. So definitely, that's definitely part of the process. So then what you want to do next is move to 15 and then see if they are earning, if they're earning basically higher profits than they would at 20. And so in this case, we know that basically moving from 20 to 15, they're actually decreasing their profits. So because they're decreasing their profits, 20 is going to be the Nash equilibrium.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm still kind of confused. Because when they moved originally from $30 to $25, isn't it always decreasing?
No, so the thing here to keep in mind is that, remember, if, so like, let me,
Oh wait, never mind. So because they're going to produce, one of them might profit more because they're going to produce more.
exactly.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's a really important point. So when you're moving from this scenario to this scenario, remember that the additional 100 quantity produced is all going to one firm. So basically at the 510 market quantity. So you would basically divide that by 2, and that would tell you how much each firm is producing. But then that 100 extra is only going to go to one firm. So the 100 extra quantity, not dollars, quantity would be added to one of the firms, the firm that cheated, but not the firm that didn't cheat. And so that's the number you would use to determine the if the firm is going to cheat and increase profit by cheating. Does anyone have any questions on that? Because I know it's kind of a weird concept, but very important concept nonetheless. Okay. So kind of already talked about this, and I want to get to the exam review, so I'm not going to kind of rehash it, but basically this is just kind of a summary slide where we review kind of verbally what we previously talked about. And then this just kind of explains that process again in how the firms choose to maximize their own individual profit. And finally, just kind of there are 2 types of competition that are kind of, they're not particularly important for, I don't think there's a question on the final about them, but I would still just like on the final when you are taking it, have this slide up and just kind of know just there are two types of competition. And so there's the core now competition, and that's basically where firms choose quantity simultaneously. So basically, when the game starts, the firms choose quantity, and that's kind of the set. That's how they initially start the game, is based on a quantity. Whereas Bertrand competition is based on price. So for price, they're basically lowering price, and that's how they get to the equilibrium point. And we can see for Bertrand competition that, unlike Cornell competition, Bertrand competition is actually allocatively efficient. And at the end of the Bertrand price competition, price is equal to marginal cost. So then it actually is an efficient outcome. And that's not true for Cornell competition. So just kind of that important distinction there between the two types of competition. Okay, so let's move to the final exam review. So just remember, oh, and looks like I forgot to add the L. So final exam review. So first thing, most important, final exam is on Sunday, May 23rd from 8 to 10 a.m. And final exam time and date is a hard date and a hard time. So that is, that has to be the time you take it, and that has to be the day you take it. Unless there's like some extreme circumstance, and then the only thing I can do is basically, you can take it at a different time on Sunday, but it has to be on Sunday. So just really, really important to remember that has to be taken on Sunday and from 8 to 10 a.m. And it's going to be in Blackboard. It'll be released via the normal process at 8 a.m. You have 2 hours. There's usually like a 5-minute buffer. So just keep that in mind. And the structure of the exam, so it's going to be 1/3 from previous chapters. And this is actually the question breakdown. So there are going to be 7 questions from chapter 4 through 8, and then 8 questions on chapters 3, 9 through 11, and then 13. And then 2/3 is actually going to be on the current chapters, so 14 through 17. So this final exam, we're definitely weighting a little more heavily to the current chapters. So definitely keep that in mind when studying. You really want to make sure you understand the more recent stuff, because that's going to be where the more difficult questions are and where the majority of the questions are. So let me pause really quickly before I jump into kind of the different different subjects to go over, and see if there are any questions on just kind of the basics of the final exam.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Is this like presentation, right? This part, is it going to be shared with us, or?
Yeah. So I can definitely upload this into the practice final in Blackboard. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, and feel free if anyone does have questions to jump in. So on chapters 3 and 9, so these are kind of the big picture pieces that you should be focusing on. So the first one is terms of trade. And we had a terms of trade question, I think on midterm 2. So that would be a really good place to start. Review the question on the midterm and make sure you understand it. It's obviously not going to be exactly the same, but that same type of structure will definitely be on the final. And then the impact of tariffs on world price. So that's really important. So if the, what does a tariff do when a country is at the world price? Very important to know that. And then also the impact of quotas. And for the quotas piece, there is a, I think it's on the final, one of the final slides on the chapter 3 and 9 PowerPoint, where I actually go over quotas. So make sure to just take a look at that, and I'll make a note here on slides. So definitely take a look at that and just make sure you understand that process. From chapter 4, it's really going to be focusing on the law of supply and the law of demand. So just kind of those basic kind of ideas we started with, just make sure you understand what the law of supply says, what the law of demand says. For chapter 5, make sure to know demand shifts and supply curve shifts. So for example, like what happens if the demand curve, so like let's say that we're here, demand curve shifts up. What does that mean for the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity? So very important to know kind of all those permutations for chapter 5. For chapter 6, make sure to know price floors and price ceilings, both what they look like and what binding and non-binding means. And I think, actually, no, not think, that the couple kind of beginning slides of chapter 6, I actually had examples of price floors and price ceilings, both binding and non-binding. So definitely make sure to take a look at those, and also, maybe keep those up during the exam. Oh yeah, just to reiterate, the exam is open book like the prior exams have been too. So from chapter 8, we're really focusing on tax burden. So remember how we had just kind of briefly draw this. We had the supply demand, had our tax here. And then we had who does the burden of the tax fall on? So how is the tax burden shared? So is it more shared by consumers, which is the pink, or is it more shared by producers, which is the red? So just kind of remember how to think about tax burdens and the relationship of elasticity to tax burdens as well. And I'll actually write here. Okay, so elasticity 2 for tax burdens. And then for total revenue, just remember how to compute it. So total revenue, price times quantity, how you get total revenue. The impact of tax on equilibrium price and quantity is really important. So like in this example here, we see that, and I'll just draw that. So we see that in actually, let me do a slightly different color so it's a little more clear. So now the green is going to be the price that consumers are paying in the market. And then I'll do blue. In the blue is the price that producers receive in the market. So just kind of remember that distinction and what that does to the price that consumers and producers receive, and also the equilibrium quantity in the market. Because we remember that equilibrium quantity is decreasing when there's a tax. Okay, so then for chapter 10, I know it's really broad, but focus on negative and positive externalities. So chapter 10 was pretty short. So just remember to really understand negative externalities, what they are, what the impact is of a negative externality. So remember, for negative externalities, they are supply, and I can write that. And then they also have the social cost curve. So that's really important as well. So they have that social cost curve, which is including and bringing into the market the negative externality of that. So just important to remember that. And for positive externality, that operates on the demand. And then that also has a new curve, but that new curve is just basically the private value. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was PC curve. So just that new curve that is basically inclusive of the positive externality, and it operates on the demand curve. And for chapter 11, so for chapter 11, just the type of goods, and I included this screenshot just that kind of gives an example of the 4 different types of goods and what each type of good says. So like private goods are excludable and rivalrous, whereas common goods are non-excludable and rivalrous. So just kind of remember those distinctions.
Professor,
Yeah.
I have a quick question about this, and I meant to ask you like a while back because it was on the last midterm. It talked about Penn Station, and it was a little confusing because Penn Station technically, like, you have to pay if you're gonna use like the train, but you don't have to pay to walk through it. So I didn't know if it was like asking if it was like Penn Station as like the train station or Penn Station as like the pathway, kind of like Grand Central.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember that for that question, was it a club good basically? Was that the answer they were looking for?
I actually haven't checked the test for the answer, but I completely forgot about it because when I was doing the test, I kept going back and forth because technically you pay for the good, right? But then I don't know if they were asking like if you walk through it, it is a kind of a common resource. So I wasn't sure.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I remember this question. So yeah, so that is the way you're thinking about it is correct, where you're basically thinking, do you have to pay for it or not pay for it? And so for Penn Station, the key point there was you don't have to pay for it because like if I wanted to walk through Penn Station, like I could walk through it and I don't have to pay to enter it, even though like I have to pay to use the train. But the other key piece there was that I think it was talking about if it was like crowded or like during peak commuting hours. So when it's not crowded, it is a public good. Whereas if it is crowded, it's a common good because it transitions from being public to common because it's crowded. So like if I go to Penn Station not during rush hour, me being there isn't impacting anyone else. But like if I go during rush hour where there's like, thousands of people and it's hard to like get through the crowd and it's really like packed, that would mean that it's a common good because me being there is actually decreasing other people's ability to use the space.
Got it. And if it was speaking about the train, it would be a private good, right? Because it's rivalrous, right? Because if I get on the train, maybe someone else can't get on the train.
Exactly. Yeah. And for the train, it would be excludable because you have to pay to use the train, whereas you don't have to pay to use Penn Station.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. That's a very good question, though. Okay. So for 13, a decent amount of stuff, but we want to remember the fixed costs, average fixed costs, variable cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost. So what are each of those things and how to compute them? So not super complicated, but just remember for average, by being average, it's implying that you're taking the total fixed cost and dividing it by the quantity. And then that's also true for variable cost as well. And then for chapter 13 as well, definitely remember long run total costs and what does that say and where does the efficient scale occur at? So when is the company going to be at the most efficient scale? And that was kind of the discussion on like constant returns to scale, diseconomies of scale, and economies of scale, where you had all of those graphs kind of moving together and you had the like long run average total cost curve that looked like that. So definitely take a look at that, and I can make a note to put the slide number on that. And then also the accounting and economic profit. So for this one as well, I would say, I think it was I think it was the second midterm as well. Yeah, it definitely was the second midterm. Take a look at the question on that. So for what that question was asking, and make sure to understand how to compute economic and accounting profit. Reviewing the question on the second midterm is a really good step to understanding that. And for chapter 14, so definitely shutdown conditions, when a firm should shut down versus when they shouldn't shut down. Exit conditions, so if a firm should exit the market, when should they exit the market? And let me just make a note to put in when as well here. And then in the chapter 14 slides, I included an example of algebra and costs. It started on slide 18. Definitely understand that entire process. That is going to be something that I can guarantee will be on the final exam. So make sure you understand how to follow all of that, because that's going to be really, really important. Yeah, so for let me see. So for the economic and accounting profit, that is not actually what we talked about from chapter 17. This is the chapter 13 economic and accounting profit, and that was where you had the implicit and explicit costs. And I can note that too. And I'll type this neater when I post it, but just so I can remember. So that is the differentiating between implicit and explicit costs, and then also making sure that you understand how to determine the economic and accounting profit based on that. Yeah, so you should be able to go back and see your midterm questions. I think I have that enabled on Blackboard. Definitely email me if you are having difficulty with that though. And I can just double check, because yeah, especially the second midterm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you click on the test, it should pop up. But for the second midterm, there are the two questions that I mentioned, specifically the economic and accounting profit, and then also the one that was brought up about the type of good. So both of those questions are great questions to review for the final. Okay, and then so mentioned algebra and cost. The other thing from chapter 14, so entry and exit in the long run. And so I gave the specifics slide number as well. So definitely make sure to go over that on the slides. And then just how to compute marginal revenue. So just remember how to compute marginal revenue and kind of what that means as well. Let me put that there. And then the profit maximization too, from the chapter 14 slides. And then finally, zero profit. So what zero profit means and what zero profit indicates about firms. And I'll put that. And then from chapter 15. So for chapter 15, definitely profit maximization for monopolies, which starts on slide 8. And then the second bullet point, it's definitely talked about in the slides, but I just kind of wanted to really hammer home like the very specific example. So like, what does it mean if the firm is producing its profit maximizing quantity? And the big hint there is, so remember for monopolies, the profit maximizing quantity is when marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. So if a question tells you a firm is producing at its profit maximizing quantity, and they give you either marginal revenue or marginal cost, you know that you will know the other one. So if they say a firm is producing it at its profit maximizing quantity and marginal revenue is 50, you know that marginal cost also has to be 50, because for the monopoly, both of those have to be equal for it to be at its profit maximizing quantity. And that was also true for monopolistic competition as well. And then also for oligopolies. Yeah, the MR equals MC is true for basically everything except perfect competition. Because for perfect competition, we have the P equals MC, which is slightly different than MR equals MC. And so as well, make sure to review perfect price discrimination as well from chapter 15, deadweight loss as well. And for deadweight loss, I'll post like a specific example later in the week, but for now, just kind of wanted to leave it as a place marker. And then also welfare costs for monopolies too. And for chapter 16, make sure to remember and focus on the monopolistic competition in the short run. And that I gave the specific slide that it starts on. And then also the transition from the short run to the long run. And I also gave the specific slide that that focuses on. And then finally, for the kind of game theory examples, I would just really kind of try to go through and remember what dominant strategy, Nash equilibrium, and prisoner's dilemma are, and how to determine those based on the little kind of examples that we went through. And I can say, so for the final, I know I included kind of some more complicated examples on the slides, but the only one you're going to have to deal with is just the 2x2 game, which is just like the games that we were reviewing today, where you have, you know, XX, 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 and XX. So you won't have to do the more complicated ones, just the kind of smaller ones. And then finally for chapter 17, so the duopoly problem, the collusion versus self-interest, and then the oligopoly equilibrium as well. And I gave the slides that all of those start on. So kind of just a good place to kind of put your studies. I'll definitely come out as well later in the week with kind of a couple specific example problems for you to do and work through, just to kind of give you a little bit more help on some of the math stuff, because I know that tended to be problematic in the prior exams. But this is a really, really good place to study and kind of to begin your study. So I definitely recommend that. And I will post this on Blackboard later tonight once I have made through and just kind of go through some of these edits that I made here. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to let me know. I think still have a little bit of time, but I don't have anything else. So you all are free to leave. I will definitely ask as well for a poll question. So later in the week, I'll send out an email that gives you the option if you want to attend a kind of final review session, when would you like to attend it? And so just answer the poll and I'll try to offer 2 of those as well. Yeah, so for the quiz grades, so I'm going to post quiz grades once you've completed your chapter 17 post-lecture quiz, which is due Sunday at 11:59. So once that's done, I'll post all of the quiz grades and the homework grades as well.
Professor, and just to be sure, so the material, the 25 questions is going to come from chapter 14 through 17?
Yes, yeah, so 25 questions, 14 through 17, exactly.
Thank you.